Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of The Destiny of Light by Catherine Greenall, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me for Chapter 1. Chapter 1, The Master's Victory. The Master looked around his elite, and he was very satisfied. They had done well. He was particularly happy with his new disciples, the long-time inhabitants of this land now called America. Enola and Kazikiani had proved to be excellent at pyrokinesis, bringing fire to their distant enemies. Megadaic and Neshoba were ruthless killers who could project their lethal venom over a great distance. Shappa could bring thunder and earthquakes at will. Yes, Balthazar was pleased with them. He clapped each of them on the back. "You have shown yourselves to be obedient and able disciples," he said. "The master is very pleased with you." They teleported in a swirl of black cloud and were instantly back at home beneath the ground. They had cut down the master's enemies, and it was good. Chapter 2, Confusion. Calum searched desperately around the faces of the villagers sheltering in the old smuggler's caves high above the swirling seas. Where on earth was Jessie? She should have been here ages before him. He had been forced to take shelter with his friends in the old Coast Guard's tower when the sea had suddenly risen. Huge waves had crashed down over the harbor road. David, Chloe, and Rob came in after him, Rob calling out for Hannah. Spotting James, Sean, Rachel, and Joanna huddled in a corner with Millie, Calum went over to them. "Have you seen Jessie or Hannah?" he asked. "Not since the storm," said James. "We thought they were with you." "Is Jessie okay?" asked Joanna, looking worried. "I hope so, sweetheart," said Calum with a weak smile. "We just need to find her." "Where are they?" asked Rob. "They were just in front of us when Lauren fell down in the rift in the road. How could they have gotten lost between the village and here? They were calling at your house, Millie, to collect you and the kids." "Well, we didn't see them. We left in a hurry when we heard the tremors. We just followed everyone up here." Calum looked around desperately. He said nothing. He was very worried now, but didn't want to let the kids know. But he knew that the last time he had seen Jessie was just before the huge tidal wave had breached the harbor wall. What if she and Hannah hadn't made it to the caves before then? He felt a wave of horror sweep over him as the full tragic possibility struck him. Had he lost his beloved Jessie for good? Chapter 3, The Devastated Elite. Sir Michael Goldman was angry. It wasn't very often that he got to take a holiday with his family. He had just arrived at Heathrow Airport for his flight to the Caribbean to rendezvous with his luxury yacht, with which the crew had waiting for him at St. Lucia. His butler had been given strict instructions that he was to contact his master only in a dire emergency, and yet he had only been gone from his mansion for a couple of hours, and he was being disturbed. His mobile phone continued to ring incessantly. Impatiently, Sir Michael pressed the button to take the call. "Yes," he barked. Then, after listening to the caller for a brief minute, he shouted, "What? The whole mansion? How could it catch fire again? What the hell happened?" He shot questions at his anxious butler, who had the unenviable job of breaking the bad news. "Look, I will be leaving it to Justin to do damage limitation. I will contact him now. We don't want the local security forces sniffing around again. If they turn up, you are to refer them to Justin. And by the way, I am now out of contact for the next 3 weeks as far as you're concerned. If I do need to be involved, Justin will contact me." He ended the call abruptly, not bothering with a goodbye or thank you. This was supposed to be a restful holiday after the elections, and now it was just turning into a nightmare. His wife, Henrietta, glanced at him. "What is it?" she asked. "Can't they manage without you for even a day? How on earth will they cope? How on earth will they cope for 3 weeks?" She scowled, unhappy that he was putting work before the family holiday. "Look, don't panic, but it was Johnson. He says that Warbeck Hall has been destroyed in a fire." She gasped. "What? How did it happen?" "I don't think we need to worry about all that now, darling. I'm asking Justin to take care of everything. We will just go to the summer house at Tintagel when we return. Don't worry." Angrily, he pushed the button to call Justin. Somebody would pay for this, he vowed. Later that evening, Sir Michael had just arrived in St. Lucia and was meeting his chauffeur to be driven to the marina where his yacht was moored. His phone, on silent since the earlier call, vibrated incessantly. "What now?" he muttered. It was Justin. "Sir Michael, I'm afraid I have bad news. Not only did Warbeck Hall pretty much burn down to the ground, but some of the masters have had terrible accidents. Tony Chan was killed along with most of the board members of his bank when an earthquake caused his mansion near Beijing to collapse. Philip Moreau died of severe burns when the water in his swimming pool at his villa in Cape Ferrat somehow heated to boiling point. His daughter Corinne and her 2 children were also injured. Lies Kaufman was engulfed by a tsunami wave following an earthquake in the mountains above her castle. There have also been reports of injuries and maybe deaths to civilians at several locations around the world. We're just trying to get a full picture." For once, Goldman was speechless. This was awful. So many of the elite wiped out just like that. How long would it take them to recover from this? But what happened? Who did this? Was it some sort of resistance movement? You aren't trying to tell me that all of these events were acts of nature. That would be too much of a coincidence, he stammered. But in his heart, he suspected that he knew who was responsible. These incidences were no coincidence. Someone would pay for it. They would pay very dearly. Chapter 4, Roll Call. The ruling World Democracy Party had ordered the mitigation of the population into the cities, and Elizabeth Mackenzie had moved her base to London in her new role as leader of the opposition party, the World Alliance. Her constituency was now the Lake District, since Sam Page had taken Calum's old seat representing the Scottish Highlands. Calum had unofficially taken up his old role of resistance leader, albeit of a very much reduced group of people. Some people, both within the village and rebels against the World Democracy Party around the world, still looked to him to resolve issues. There were only around 50 people who had decided to defy government instructions to move to the nearest big city and instead remain in the village. They didn't know how long this would be allowed, and life was certainly going to be difficult, but they were not giving up without a fight. Calum was calling out the names of all the known inhabitants left in the village, checking off the names on a list. He went. "Lauren Mackenzie," he called. Then he realized that she would not be answering him. Faltering, he quickly read Jesse and Hannah's names, a deep dread creeping over him as he worried whether they too had perished in the earthquake and tsunami. He got to the end of the list. There were 4 people missing: Jesse, Hannah, Lauren, and a man named Vinnie O'Neill, who lived on the outskirts of the village. Nobody had seen him since the earthquake. "I need volunteers for a search party," said Calum. "Maybe the missing people have just been injured and couldn't reach the caves. Except Lauren, of course," added Rob. He felt it was a desperate hope, but he had to cling on to something. A subdued group of people, including Calum, Rob, David, Chloe, Millie, and Bill, set out to search the village, starting with the last known locations of the missing 4. Millie opened her front door and pushed her way inside. "Jesse, Hannah," she called, going from room to room, followed by Calum and Rob. "Have they taken shelter here?" When they had called for the children, noticing that the storm had started to rise. There were no welcome answering voices. They reached the final bedroom upstairs and looked inside. Nothing. David, Chloe, and Bill headed to the edge of the village where Vinnie O'Neill had lived alone. As they walked up the lane that led to his house, it became evident that a catastrophic force had struck his house. "Oh my God," said Chloe as she reviewed the ruins of what had been a white stone cottage. The whole of the upper floor was gone, collapsed in a heap of stones on top of the lower floor. The whole building now just a pile of tumbled stones and broken furniture. Vinnie, are you in there?" called Bill. David had fetched Shep with him in case he was able to detect life where none was visible in the rubble. He unclipped the leash and Shep ran over to the heap of rubble, sniffing the stones and the broken furniture. They started to carefully lift stones and unrecognizable pieces of wood and metal aside carefully, looking beneath each for any sign of Vinnie. Suddenly there was a volley of barks and Shep was standing, his ears up and tail wagging intently, staring at a heap of wreckage in the middle of the pile. They rushed over to the site, trying not to disturb anything. "Vinnie, are you there?" shouted David. As they looked where Shep was focused, they could see a heap of wood and clothing. "Oh no," said Chloe, as she gently pulled away blocks of wood and stones from the heap of clothing, and a shape emerged. It was Vinnie. He was stone cold. "Poor guy, he must have been in bed when the earthquake struck," said Bill. he wouldn't have stood a chance. The whole bedroom must have collapsed onto the ground floor. He must have been dead for hours. Let's get him loose and do what has to be done, said Chloe. Between them, they retrieved the body from his ruined house and wrapped it in blankets. They carried the bundle back down into the village with heavy hearts. Calum said some prayers, and the villagers joined in as they shoveled the dirt on top of Vinny's body. They also buried Lauren after rinsing her body from the crevice. Calum felt that he had said too many funeral prayers these last 2 or 3 years for people who had died way before their time, a lot of them close friends and family. It never got any easier, and they still hadn't found Jesse or Hannah. It was midnight, and the inhabitants of the manse were trying to sleep. James and Sean were talking quietly in their room, too wound up to sleep. Rachel was wide awake, thinking of Jessie and worrying about what could have happened to her. Could Balthazar have taken her again? He had done it before. That would be awful. But the alternative was just too terrible to consider, that she might not have survived the storms and the tsunami, buried somewhere underneath a yet undiscovered rockfall or swept out to sea. She glanced over at her sister, Joanna, asleep at last after lying weeping for some time. She was grief-stricken that Jessie was missing and that her favorite teacher, Miss Mackenzie, was dead. What an awful day. Downstairs, Calum poured himself another whiskey. He knew that this would not solve his problems, but at least it was taking the edge off his pain. Realistically, he couldn't see any way that Jessie could have survived that storm. They had searched the village painstakingly, including sifting through the rubble of all the collapsed buildings and all along the shoreline where she had last been seen. Was there an outside chance that Balthazar had taken her again? Even that awful possibility would be preferable to Jessie being gone forever. Tears streamed down his face as he contemplated life without his beloved Jessie. He didn't think he could cope.